The end of the world was not a scream, but a hum. It was a sound that arrived before the silence, a low, pervasive thrum that vibrated in the fillings of your teeth and resonated deep in your bones. A sound that felt less like hearing and more like remembering a forgotten, planetary heartbeat. Dr. Eris Thorne felt it now, a constant companion in the twilight that had long ago consumed the Arctic sun. He lay flat against the frozen scree of a mountainside overlooking the skeletal remains of what was once Longyearbyen, the air so cold it felt solid in his lungs. Below him, the town was a crystalline sculpture garden. Buildings were encased in, and in some places, entirely replaced by, geometric lattices of a shimmering, semi-translucent material that pulsed with a faint internal light, all of it synchronized to the planet's new, monotonous rhythm. This was the work of the Vex, the name humanity had given the ghost in the machine, the silent, indifferent force that was not conquering Earth, but methodically overriding it. They were not invaders, they were cosmic editors, deleting a flawed draft. Iris adjusted the scavenged binoculars, the metal freezing to his gloved hands. He wasn't looking for Vex drones, the silent, hovering polyhedrons they called harvesters. You never saw them until it was too late, and their purpose wasn't to hunt, but to process. They moved in slow, methodical grids, and anything organic caught within their operating field simply unraveled. Flesh, bone, wood, and soil would dissolve into a fine, gray dust that the wind would carry away, leaving behind only the sterile, crystalline foundation for whatever came next. No, Eris was looking for something far more precious and infinitely more fragile. He scanned the ruins of the university library, its frame pierced by a dozen glowing spires. He was a historian, a philologist whose life's work had been the resurrection of dead languages, the careful unspooling of meaning from forgotten glyphs and fossilized syntax. Now, his own language, along with every other tongue ever spoken, was joining their ranks. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for the antidote to oblivion. He was a memory keeper at the end of all memory. A flicker of movement caught his eye, not the silent, gliding motion of a harvester, but the jerky, inefficient stagger of a survivor. A lone figure, bundled in rags, was picking their way through the glass-like streets below. A fool, Eris thought, his heart sinking. To be out in the open for so long was a death sentence. The planetary hum deepened for a moment, a shift in pitch almost too subtle to perceive, and from behind a crystalline monolith, a harvester emerged. It was a perfect octahedron, its surface the color of oil on water, and it moved with an unnerving, fluid grace. It paid no mind to the survivor. It was simply beginning its designated sweep. The figure below finally saw it and froze, a statue of terror amidst the eerie monuments of the Vex. Eris watched, helpless, as the drone's field activated. There was no beam, no explosion, a wave of visible distortion, like heat haze on a summer road, washed over the area. The survivor's form wavered, their rags dissolving first, followed by the soft tissues of their body, until only a skeleton remained, stark white against the gray snow, and then the bones too turned to dust, mingling with the ruins of a bookshop, a cafe, a home. The harvester passed on, utterly indifferent, its task complete. Eris closed his eyes, his own breath catching in his throat. He was a guardian of stories, and he had just watched a final, unwritten chapter dissolve into nothing. He had what he came for, a satchel filled with salvaged hard drives and a few miraculously preserved books, but the cost of these small victories felt heavier each time. He waited for the hum to return to its baseline frequency before slinking back down the mountain. Another ghost in a world of them. His destination the one place left that held back the encroaching silence, the sanctuary. Deep beneath that same mountain, burrowed into the permafrost, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault had been reborn. Once a bastion for the world's botanical legacy, it was now a sarcophagus for the memory of humankind. They called it Sanctuary, 120 souls clinging to the last spark of civilization in the frozen dark. The blast doors, designed to withstand nuclear war, now served to muffle the ceaseless hum of the Vex, though it could still be felt, a phantom vibration in the concrete floor. The air within was stale, recycled, tasting of metal and desperation. The vault's long, sloping entrance tunnel was now a gauntlet of makeshift checkpoints and pressure sensors. At its heart, the seed chambers themselves remained sacrosanct, their precious contents a symbol of a future no one truly believed would come. The survivors lived and worked in the expanded access tunnels and newly excavated caverns, a warren of cramped habitation modules, hydroponic farms, and workshops, all lit by the cold, efficient glow of LED strips. The leader of this fragile colony was Kalen, a former Arctic engineer whose face seemed carved from the same unforgiving rock as their shelter. Her authority was absolute, not by force, but by the sheer, undeniable weight of her competence. She was a creature of pragmatism, of load-bearing capacities and power consumption rates. She saw the world in systems that needed to be maintained, and Eris, with his collection of dead data, was a system she struggled to justify. He found her in the central command hub, a cramped space dominated by a large tactical map of the archipelago, its surface a chaotic scrawl of energy readings and harvester patrol routes. She was arguing with the head of hydroponics over a power schematic, her voice low and tight. The grow lamps for Sector Gamma are drawing 17% more power than allocated, she said, not looking up from the screen. Reroute auxiliary power from the archival servers. I need those protein yields, not ghost stories. Eris felt the familiar sting of the dismissal. He stepped forward, placing his satchel on the table. These aren't ghost stories, Kalen. They're schematics, geological surveys, communication logs. They're the pieces of the puzzle. Kalen finally looked at him, her gray eyes tired but sharp. The puzzle of how we died, Eris. I appreciate your work. I do. Preserving what we were is a noble goal, but my job is to make sure there's someone left to remember it. The Vex are accelerating their terraforming. The atmospheric processors in the south are coming online. Our air filters won't last another year against that. We need practical solutions, not academic theories. What if the theory is the only practical solution we have? Eris countered, his voice rising with an urgency he couldn't suppress. He pulled a data slate from his bag, facing its screen flickering to life. I've been cross-referencing global seismic data from before the arrival with the Vex's current terraforming patterns. They aren't just building randomly. Their spires, their largest constructions. They follow the ley lines of the planet, the major tectonic faults. It's too precise to be a coincidence. He tapped the screen, bringing up a map overlaid with dozens of glowing lines. And the hum, the sound they make. It's not just engine noise. It's complex, modulated. It contains repeating sequences, syntax, structure. Kalen, I think it's a language. A grizzled engineer standing nearby let out a short, harsh laugh. A language. They're turning our planet into a paperweight, and you think they're singing to it. Exactly, Eris exclaimed, turning to the man. So, not singing, perhaps, but communicating, giving instructions. Their technology isn't just being operated, it's being conducted. They are speaking to the planet's geological structure, and the planet is responding. We've been trying to fight the machines, but the machines are just the ink. The real enemy is the word. Kaylin stared at the map, her expression unreadable. She traced one of the glowing lines with her finger, a line that ran directly beneath their own mountain. And what, precisely, do you propose we do with this? Eris, do you want to try and talk them out of it? The sarcasm was a shield, but Eris saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, the exhaustion of a leader running out of options. He took a deep breath. This was the precipice, the moment his madness would either be dismissed or embraced. I don't want to talk to them. I want to talk to their system. In these old archives, I found references to an abandoned Cold War listening post buried even deeper than we are. Project Echo. It was a deep Earth acoustic observatory designed to monitor submarine movements by listening to the planet's core. Its sensors are powerful enough to detect the echo of a pin dropping in the Mariana Trench. They were designed to listen for patterns. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The Vex are using a logical, purpose-driven language to achieve a logical, purpose-driven goal. What if we introduce a variable? Their system can't compute a signal that doesn't compute, that doesn't have a logical purpose. A linguistic virus. He could feel the disbelief in the room, a palpable weight. I'm talking about broadcasting a paradox. We can't fight their logic, so we have to break it. Using the echo array, we could broadcast a signal based on purely human concepts their system has no framework for. Grief, irrational hope, self-sacrifice, memory itself. We fight their symphony of creation with a cacophony of human consciousness. The room was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint, ever-present hum from the world above. Kaylin looked from Eris's wild, pleading eyes to the tactical map, where new red icons indicated harvester swarms converging on a survivor outpost to the east. Her way, the practical way of guns and walls and rations, was failing. They were losing a war of attrition against an enemy that didn't even know it was fighting. Every conventional strategy had failed. Perhaps it was time for an unconventional one. "You're telling me," she said slowly, her voice a low rasp, "that you want to risk a team, resources we don't have, to go on a hunt for a mythological Cold War bunker, so you can shout poetry at the apocalypse." Eris met her gaze without flinching. "I'm saying it's the only thing we haven't tried." He saw the battle in her eyes, the engineer warring with the desperate leader. She looked at the faces around her, tired, scared, but still looking to her for a decision. She ran a hand over her cropped hair, a gesture of profound weariness. Finally, she nodded, a short, sharp motion. "Fine." She breathed, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence or a prayer. "You get your expedition. A small team, minimal resources. You have 1 week to find this Echo facility and prove it's not a ghost story." She turned and pointed a hardened finger at his chest. "But Eris, if you're wrong, if this is just a wild goose chase while my people starve, don't bother coming back." The ultimatum was cold, but beneath it, Eris felt a sliver of something that felt dangerously like hope. He was a man who studied the dead, and he had just been given a chance to speak for them, one last time. As the small team assembled near the main airlock, 2 grim-faced scouts named Lena and Gregor, and Kaylin herself, who refused to delegate a mission this insane, Eris felt the full weight of his promise settle upon him. He was not a soldier or an explorer. His hands were soft, more accustomed to the delicate pages of ancient manuscripts than the cold steel of a pulse rifle. He looked at the faces of his companions, their features etched with a mixture of doubt and grim determination. They were venturing out of the tomb of humanity, not to fight for land or for life, but for a story, for the slim possibility that a well-formed word could be a more powerful weapon than any bomb. As the immense inner door of the airlock hissed open, a gust of impossibly cold air washed over them, carrying with it the deep, resonant hum of the changing world. It was the sound of their enemy, the voice of the Vec, and for the first time, Eris Thorn, the linguist, smiled. He was going to answer back. The world outside the sanctuary was a masterpiece of silent, alien geometry. The journey began across the vast and frozen expanse of a fjord the Vex had flash frozen and then reshaped. Its surface now a perfectly flat plain of black ice that reflected a perpetually twilight sky. The air was thin and sharp, and every breath was a conscious effort, a small theft from an atmosphere that no longer felt like their own. Above them, the clouds were gone, replaced by a high, thin veil of crystalline particulates that refracted the faint light of the distant, occluded sun into a constant, shimmering aurora. But there was no beauty in it. It was the sterile beauty of a circuit board, of a system operating with perfect, inhuman efficiency. The Vex structures that dotted the landscape were not like buildings. They were like ideas given form. Some were towering, needle-thin spires that seemed to stitch the sky to the earth, while others were massive, complex polyhedrons half buried in the ice, their facets shifting with an internal, rhythmic light. Eris saw them not as architecture, but as punctuation in a vast planetary sentence he was only just beginning to comprehend. The planetary hum was their constant companion, a sound that drilled into their skulls and settled behind their eyes. It was the backdrop to every crunch of their boots on the snow, every whispered word, every frantic beat of their hearts. Gregor, a man whose silence was as much a tool as the rifle slung over his back, led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow and ridge. Lena followed, her movements economical and precise, her focus on the handheld scanner that mapped the terrain and monitored for the telltale energy signatures of harvesters. Kaelin walked beside Eris, her presence a silent judgment. She watched his every move, her pragmatism a stark contrast to his almost feverish intellectual curiosity. On the second day, the clash came. They had taken shelter from the wind in the lee of a massive, crystalline formation that resembled a frozen wave. While Kaelin and Gregor checked their power packs and ration levels, Eris was standing transfixed before the structure, a small sensitive microphone in his hand, its cable running to a data slate. He was trying to record the specific resonance of the crystal. "What are you doing?" Kaelin's voice was sharp, cutting through his concentration. "Its frequency is different from the spires," Eris said, his eyes wide with discovery. "It's a lower octave." "It's not a transmitter. I think it's a capacitor, storing the energy from the global hum before it's channeled into the tectonic lines. It's a rock." "Oris," Kaelin snapped, striding over to him. A weird, glowing rock in a world full of them. Meanwhile, Gregor's thermal boots are drawing 6% more power than they should, and we are 300 kilometers from our objective in an environment that will kill us if we stop paying attention for 5 minutes. Stop listening to the wallpaper and focus on the mission. This is the mission. Eris shot back, turning to face her, his voice passionate. "To you, this is all just hostile terrain, an obstacle to be overcome. To me, it's the enemy's textbook. Every crystal, every frequency shift is a word, a piece of their grammar. The more I understand how they speak, the better I can formulate the paradox that will break them. Our survival isn't in your power packs, Kaelin. It's in this." He held up the data slate, its screen displaying a complex waveform. Kaelin stared at him, her face a mask of frustration and grudging respect. "The language of our extinction," she said, her voice flat. "Just make it quick. The wind is changing." Before Eris could reply, a new sound intruded, a rising tone that eclipsed the background hum. Lena shouted a single word, harmonic. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate violently. The crystalline wave they were using for shelter began to glow with a blinding intensity, the light pulsing in time with the escalating sound. "Move!" Gregor yelled, already scrambling away. "Crevasse, 50 meters west." They ran, the ice groaning and cracking around them as the very landscape seemed to writhe in response to the Vex's command. New spires, thin as glass, erupted from the ground, growing with an unnatural speed. One shot up just feet from Lena, who threw herself sideways to avoid being impaled. They dove into the relative safety of the crevasse just as the harmonic reached its crescendo. The sound was no longer audible. It was a physical pressure that vibrated their bones and made their teeth ache. The light from the Vex structures flooded the sky, turning the world into a strobing, overexposed photograph. Eris, huddled against the ice wall, watched in a mixture of terror and awe. He wasn't just witnessing destruction, he was witnessing creation. The Vex were not just building on the world, they were composing with it, using tectonic plates as their instruments and magnetic fields as their strings. The entire planet was being tuned. The event lasted for nearly a minute, and when it subsided, the landscape had changed. The plane they had just crossed was now a maze of new, razor-sharp crystalline formations. The path forward was gone. After a long, tense silence, Gregor cautiously peered over the edge of the crevasse. "We're boxed in," he reported, his voice grim. "The route to the south is impassable. We'll have to find a way through the eastern glacial tunnels." It was a significant detour, one that would cost them at least a day. The weight of Kalen's ultimatum settled heavily in the silence as they navigated the treacherous, claustrophobic ice tunnels, guided by the narrow beams of their headlamps. The mood was somber. The display of the Vex's power had shaken them all. It was one thing to be hunted by drones. It was another to be an insect on a page that was actively being rewritten. But the event had also solidified something for Eris. "Did you notice the pattern?" he whispered to Kalen as they squeezed through a narrow passage. The new spires. They formed along a logarithmic spiral. It wasn't random growth. It was a mathematical equation made manifest. They're not just overriding us. They're refining us, down to the base code of the universe. Kalen didn't answer, but she didn't dismiss him either. For the first time, she seemed to be listening not just to his words, but to the world around them. 2 days later, hungry, exhausted, and a day and a half behind schedule, Gregor found it. He'd been scouting ahead and returned with a single, sharp gesture for them to follow. On a sheer rock face, nearly invisible against the gray stone, was a small, rusted metal plate bearing a faded red star and a string of Cyrillic letters. Below it, a set of seams in the rock suggested a door. It took them an hour of chipping away ice and prying with a crowbar before the heavy, insulated door groaned open, revealing a descent into darkness. The air that rushed out was ancient, stale, and blessedly free of the Vex hum. They had found a pocket of the old world. The bunker was a time capsule from the height of the Cold War. A single corridor led to a small cluster of rooms, a cramped barracks, a communications hub filled with dead, hulking machinery, and a central observatory. Dust lay thick on every surface. Kalen, inner element, went straight to a generator panel, her skilled hands working by the light of her headlamp. After a few tense moments of splicing cables and rerouting power from their own packs, a string of bare, yellowed bulbs flickered to life, casting the room in a sickly, jaundiced glow. The observatory was dominated by a massive analog console covered in dials, switches, and a central seismic plotter with a needle frozen mid-scribble. Tacked to the walls were geological maps of the Arctic, covered in handwritten annotations, while Kalen worked to see if any of the equipment was salvageable. Eris moved to a metal desk where a logbook lay open, its pages stiff with age. The entries, written in precise Russian, began as dry, scientific observations. They detailed the bunker's secret purpose. Project Echo was not just one facility, but a network of them. And this was merely an outpost, a listening station. Its primary function was to monitor deep Earth acoustics, searching for enemy submarines. But a few years into its operation, the entries began to change. The lead seismologist, a man named Dr. Yuri Volkov, started noting a persistent, low-frequency anomaly. A subaural signal, he wrote, too structured to be geological. It has the characteristics of a carrier wave, but there is no payload. It is like listening to a broadcast of pure silence. As Eris read on, his own heart began to pound in his chest. Volkov had detected the Vex hum decades before their arrival. He had been the first human to hear their voice. The final entries were a descent into frantic obsession. The neat script became a scrawl. The signal is no longer passive. It is responding to our deep Earth sonar pings. It learns. It repeats the patterns back to us, but with corrections, as if it is teaching us the proper way to speak to the rock. I have tried to warn Moscow, but they call it equipment malfunction, solar interference. They do not understand. The silence is not empty. The silence is listening. The very last entry was a single, terrifying sentence, scrawled across the page. It is not a signal. It is a seed. Eris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked up at Kalen, who had abandoned the generator and was now staring at a schematic she'd found in a locker. Her face was pale in the dim light. "Eris," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "this isn't the main Echo facility. Like the log says, it's an outpost. But this is a map to the central hub. It's buried beneath the Tolliver Glacier, another 100 kilometers north." She held up the schematic, her hand trembling slightly. It showed a massive subterranean complex centered around a huge spherical chamber labeled Acoustic Resonance Core. They had found it. They had the proof. A surge of triumphant adrenaline coursed through Eris. He turned back to his desk, his eyes scanning Volkov's frantic notes for anything else. And that's when he saw it. The needle on the seismic plotter, which had been dormant for half a century, twitched. Then it twitched again, scratching a tiny line against the yellowed paper. Gregor, who had been guarding the entrance, suddenly stiffened. "Listen," he hissed. The silence was gone, faintly at first, then growing steadily in volume. The Vex hum was seeping through the rock, through the insulated hull of the bunker. But this was different. It wasn't the diffuse, planetary thrum they were used to. This was a focused, directed tone, and its pitch was rising. On Kalen's scanner, which she had left active on the console, a single, powerful energy signature bloomed to life, its epicenter somewhere in the mountains above them. It was a focused beam of energy, aimed directly at their position. They had been silent for decades, a forgotten ghost in the mountain. But by reactivating the power, by disturbing the dust, they had created a tiny spark of incongruity in the Vex's perfect system, and the system had noticed. The needle on the plotter began to vibrate violently, scratching a frantic, chaotic signature as the hum grew into a deafening roar. They were no longer invisible. They were a flaw in the design. and the editors were coming to make a correction. The hum was no longer a sound. It was a physical assault. It vibrated through the concrete floor, rattled the ancient equipment on its mounts, and seemed to squeeze the very air from their lungs. The single yellow bulb above them flickered and died, plunging them into a darkness punctuated only by the frantic beams of their headlamps and the cold, green glow of Kalen's scanner. On its screen, the energy signature directly above them intensified, coalescing into a sharp, terrifying point. "They're not sending a harvester," Lena stated, her voice tight with professional calm that did little to conceal the underlying terror. "This is a resonance drill. They're going to collapse the mountain on top of us." Kalen's mind, a machine of pragmatic calculation, was already working. How long? Based on the energy curve, minutes. Maybe 5. Lena replied, her fingers flying across the scanner's interface, trying to find a flaw in its grim diagnosis. "The rock above us is already fracturing. We can't go back the way we came." Gregor grunted from the doorway, his rifle held at the ready as if he could shoot the sound itself. "The entrance will be the first thing to go?" Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to rise in Eris's throat. This was it. After everything, to be buried alive in the tomb of the one man who had understood, who could have warned them. He saw Volkov's final, scrawled words in his mind. "The silence is listening." They had made it listen. Kalen slammed her fist on the central console, the metallic clang lost in the overwhelming hum. "No," she snarled, her eyes wild and determined. "We don't die here." She shone her light on the schematic she'd found, the map to the main Echo facility. "Look," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. "This outpost isn't just a listening station. It's connected. There's a maintenance shaft, a geothermal vent access tunnel. It runs north, deep into the bedrock. It was designed to service the main array's power conduits." She traced a thin, dotted line that snaked away from their location on the map. It was a path, a tiny, desperate thread leading away from the point of imminent collapse. Gregor was already at the back of the observatory, prying at a section of the wall indicated on the schematic. With a groan of protesting metal, a panel came loose, revealing a dark, circular opening no wider than a man's shoulders. A blast of frigid air, smelling of deep earth and ozone, rushed out. "It's here," he confirmed. "No time to think," Kalen ordered, already shrugging off her heavier gear. "Go." "Lena, you're on point. Gregor, take the rear. Eris, you're with me." They scrambled into the shaft, a claustrophobic, vertical drop that quickly leveled out into a narrow, cylindrical tunnel. It was pitch black, and the air was thin and freezing. The roar of the resonance drill was muffled now, replaced by the terrifying, low-frequency vibration that traveled through the rock itself, a constant reminder of the tons of stone being pulverized above them. The tunnel was a relic, its metal walls slick with a century of condensation and mineral deposits. They moved as fast as they could, their progress agonizingly slow. The floor was uneven, littered with rusted debris and sections where the metal had corroded away, revealing the raw, jagged rock beneath. After what felt like an eternity, a massive, shuddering boom echoed through the tunnel, and the floor beneath them bucked violently. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling. That was the outpost. Lena's voice crackled over their comms, strained but steady. "They're through." A profound, echoing silence followed. The overwhelming hum was gone. For a moment, Eris felt a sense of relief so profound it was dizzying. Then he realized the truth. It wasn't that the hum was gone. They had simply gone deeper than it could penetrate. They were in the quiet places of the world now, the deep bedrock that had been silent for millennia. They were in Volkov's silence. The journey through the geothermal tunnels was a descent into a different kind of hell. The cold gave way to a stifling, humid heat as they drew closer to the planet's natural thermal vents. The air grew thick with the smell of sulfur and superheated minerals. Their headlamps cut feeble paths through billowing clouds of steam that erupted from fissures in the tunnel walls, making every step treacherous. They were ghosts in a machine, following the veins of a forgotten network that connected the surface world to the planet's molten heart. They lost all track of time. Hours bled into one another, marked only by short, exhausted rest to sip recycled water and chew on nutrient paste that tasted like chalk. The psychological toll was immense. In the darkness, with only the sound of their own breathing and the drip of water, paranoia began to set in. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was a potential threat. But there was nothing. The Vex, it seemed, did not operate this deep. Their war was with the surface, with the biosphere. This deep, primordial world was beneath their notice. Eris, however, felt a different kind of presence. He thought of Volkov, of the man spending years in that bunker, listening to the planet breathe, slowly going mad as he realized something was breathing back. Eris began to feel it too. A sense of being observed not by an alien intelligence, but by the planet itself. The rock around them felt ancient and alive, and they were intruders in its deep, slow consciousness. It was during one of their brief halts that Eris noticed it. While the others were checking their equipment, he ran a hand along the tunnel wall, not the corroded metal, but a section of exposed obsidian-like rock. It was warm to the touch, and he realized it was vibrating, but it wasn't the chaotic, shuddering vibration of an unstable tunnel. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat. "Kaylin," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Come here." She came over, her face smudged with grime, her exhaustion plain to see. He took her hand and pressed it against the rock. Her eyes widened. "Geothermal pulse," she asked, her engineer's mind searching for a rational explanation. "It's too regular," Eris said. "It's not geology. It's a signal. Faint, but it's there." He pulled out his data slate, the one he had protected with his life. He powered it on and held its sensitive internal microphone against the wall. On the screen, a waveform appeared, weak but perfectly structured. It was a single, repeating pattern, a rhythmic beat like a drum. "It's not Vex," he breathed. "The Vex hum is complex, polyphonic. This is simple, ancient. It's a baseline." Before Kaylin could process this, Lena's voice came over the comms. "I have something. Up ahead. A light source." They moved forward, their pace quickening with a mixture of hope and dread. The tunnel began to widen, the oppressive heat lessening, and the rhythmic pulse from the rock grew stronger. They emerged from the narrow shaft into a cavern so vast their headlamps couldn't find the ceiling. And in its center, suspended by a web of massive Oimeskniwan cables, was the source of the light and the pulse. It was a perfect sphere, at least 50 meters in diameter, its surface a seamless, milky white material that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, the light waxing and waning in time with the rhythmic beat that now filled the air. This was the acoustic resonance core. This was Project Echo. The chamber was a cathedral of forgotten science. Walkways and gantries crisscrossed the empty space around the sphere, all leading to a central control room built into the cavern wall. It was clear that this facility was far more advanced than the outpost. There was no dust, no decay. A low-level power seemed to be active, preserving the environment in a state of perfect stasis. As they stepped onto a gantry, the sphere reacted and the rhythmic pulsing intensified. And a low, resonant tone filled the air, a pure, clean note that vibrated in their chests. It wasn't hostile like the Vex hum, it was inquisitive. "It knows we're here," Eris whispered in awe. They made their way to the control room. Unlike the analog mess of the outpost, this was a place of sleek, Cold War modernism. Consoles with clean lines, large, dark screens, and chairs that looked like they belonged on the set of a science fiction film. A single, large terminal dominated the center of the room, its screen dark. "There's a power source," Kaylin murmured, her eyes tracing thick, armored cables leading from the sphere into the floor. "A geothermal tap. It's been running on a low-level standby for 60 years. She moved to the main terminal, her fingers hovering over the dormant keyboard. "If I can interface with this, bring the main systems online." As she worked, Eris approached the large observation window that looked out at the sphere. The surface of the core was no longer just a milky white. Faint, intricate patterns were now swirling across it, like ink in water. They were complex, geometric, and strangely familiar. They mirrored the logarithmic spirals of the Vex formations, the branching patterns of river deltas, the structure of a snowflake. "What is this thing?" Gregor asked, his voice full of a rare, undisguised awe, his rifle hanging forgotten at his side. "It's not a weapon," Eris said, his mind racing, connecting Volkov's notes with the pulsing sphere and the patterns on its surface. "And it's not just a listening device." Volkov said the Vex signal was a seed. He was wrong. The Vex signal was the answer. This is the seed. This is Project Echo's true purpose. It wasn't designed to listen to submarines. It was designed to listen to the Earth and to talk back. Just then, Kaylin let out a sharp gasp. The central terminal had flickered to life. On its screen, lines of code scrolled past, too fast to read, and then a single question appeared, written in stark, white text, in perfect, unaccented English. It was a question that chilled them to the bone, a question that reframed their entire understanding of the war, of their enemy, of the very planet they stood upon. The question on the screen read, "Re-establishing contact. Report. Has the correction arrived?" The question hung in the sterile air of the control room, an impossible artifact from a dead world. Kaylin stood frozen before the terminal, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the console. Gregor took a half-step back, his hand instinctively going to his rifle, a useless gesture against a ghost in a machine. Lena moved to Kaylin's side, her analytical mind struggling to parse the implications. Only Eris stepped forward, his eyes wide with a terrifying, exhilarating understanding. "The correction," he whispered, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "That's what this is, not an invasion, a correction." He looked from the screen to the pulsating sphere outside, its surface now swirling with complex, evolving geometries. This facility, Project Echo, it wasn't a warning system. It was a summons. He placed a hand on Kaylin's shoulder. "Don't answer it. Not yet. We need to know who we're talking to." Kaylin, snapping out of her shock, nodded curtly. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not typing a response, but diving into the system's core programming. Her engineering expertise now her only weapon. She was a trespasser in a digital crypt, and she was searching for the name on the tombstone. The machine resisted. Firewalls, ancient but incredibly sophisticated, rose to block her. But the system was old, And Kaylin was a child of a world that had perfected the art of breaking things. She found back doors, exploited dormant diagnostic routines, and slowly, painstakingly, began to peel back the layers of 60-year-old code. While she worked, Eris turned his attention to the sphere. The core, the rhythmic pulse, had changed. It was faster now, expectant. The patterns on its surface were no longer abstract. They were beginning to resolve into recognizable forms. He saw stellar maps, the double helix of DNA, the intricate patterns of weather systems. It was a visual dictionary of a world, a planet's account of itself. It's a planetary consciousness, Eris murmured, mostly to himself, or an interface to one, a Gaia protocol. The early Cold War scientists, they must have detected it, not just the Vex hum, but this, the planet's own signal. They built this whole facility not just to listen, but to establish a dialogue about what Lena asked. Her voice hushed. Look at the state of the world they were living in. Eris replied, his gaze distant. The brink of nuclear annihilation, rampant pollution, the beginning of mass extinction. They were watching the world burn. What if they came to a conclusion that humanity wasn't a species, but a disease, a failed experiment? What if they decided the planet needed to be saved from itself? The pieces were slotting together in his mind, forming a picture of horror and hubris. They couldn't bring themselves to push the red button, to wipe the slate clean themselves. So they did the next best thing. They sent out a message, a distress call, a request for a planetary physician. They called for a correction. He looked back at the terminal, where Kaylin was sweating under the strain of her digital battle, and the Vex answered. A sudden, triumphant cry from Kaylin broke the tension. I'm in, she breathed. I've bypassed the primary command interface. I have access to the mission logs. On the screen, the single, haunting question was replaced by a wall of text. It was the final project directive for Project Echo, dated 1983, classified at a level Eris had never even heard of. It was a manifesto, a suicide note for the human race, written by its own brightest minds. The project's director, a name they didn't recognize, Dr. Alistair Finch, had laid it all out. They had concluded that humanity was an evolutionary dead end, a chaotic variable that threatened the stability of the entire biosphere. Their solution was as elegant as it was monstrous. Using the acoustic resonance core, they had broadcast a complex mathematical proof into deep space. The proof detailed the planet's systemic decay and ended with a single, unanswered variable. It was a cosmic cry for help, an invitation for a higher, more logical intelligence to solve the equation. The Vex were the solution. The log was chillingly specific. The correction was designed to be a systemic reset, a non-hostile restructuring of planetary biologic. The Vex were not invaders. They were gardeners, sent to pull a weed. Project Echo was designed to go into a dormant, listening mode, waiting for a signal that the correction had arrived and was proceeding as planned. The question on the screen was not an inquiry. It was a status check. They sold us out. Gregor spat, the words dripping with venom. They doomed us all. They thought they were saving the world. Eris corrected softly, though the thought brought him no comfort. As they absorbed the terrible truth, the terminal beeped again. A new message appeared below the first one. Response overdue. Initiating diagnostic protocol. Please confirm identity, Finch. Alistair. The machine thought its master had returned. It was waiting for a password, a final command. Kaylin looked at Eris, her face grim. It wants to talk to its father. What do we do if we don't respond? It might send out a new signal, or worse, alert the Vex to this facility's location and its true purpose. Eris's mind was a whirlwind. They stood at the ultimate crossroads. They could try to destroy the core, severing the connection forever, but that felt like killing the planet itself to spite its creators. They could do nothing and let the Vex complete their sterile, perfect work. Or they could do the one thing he had set out to do from the very beginning. They could answer back, but not to the Vex. They would answer Dr. Finch. They would answer the ghosts who had condemned them. The paradox. Eris said, his voice ringing with a newfound, terrifying clarity. It's not for the Vex. It was never for the Vex. They're just a tool. The paradox is for this. For the system that called them. He turned to Kalen. This machine, this planetary interface, it operates on the logic of Finch and his team. The logic of systems, of balance sheets, of acceptable losses. It thinks humanity is a failed equation. We have to show it a new kind of math. He stepped up to the keyboard. They asked for a correction. Let's give them one. Let's show them the variable they didn't account for. He began to type, not code, but words. He didn't try to impersonate Finch. He identified them as the anomaly, the error in the calculation. And then he began to feed the machine the raw, unstructured data of human experience, the very concepts he had planned to broadcast. He fed it the poetry of loss, the illogical fury of a parent defending a child, the calculus of self-sacrifice. He uploaded the histories of art and music he had saved, the philosophical treatises on love and despair, the unwritten stories of the countless millions who had been turned to dust by the Vex's correction. He typed in the story of the survivor Eris had watched die in Longyearbyen, a life reduced to a footnote. He told the machine of their own desperate journey, of Kalen's stubborn refusal to fail, of Gregor's silent loyalty. He was giving the ghost in the machine a soul. At first, the core did not seem to react. The terminal simply accepted the data, the lines of text scrolling into its memory. But then, the rhythmic pulse of the sphere began to falter. The pure, clean tone it emitted wavered, introducing notes of dissonance. The geometric patterns on its surface dissolved into chaotic, unpredictable swirls of light. It was a machine built on pure logic, and Eris was flooding its circuits with the beautiful, terrible chaos of the human heart. Data is inconsistent. The terminal finally responded, the text flickering. The variable of grief produces a non-linear degradation in system efficiency. The concept of hope presents as a recursive logical fallacy. Keep going, Kalen urged, her eyes locked on the sphere, which was now pulsing erratically, its light shifting from white to a jarring, feverish red. Eris poured everything he had left into it. He typed until his fingers were numb, telling the story of humanity not as a species, but as a collection of individual, irreplaceable moments of joy, pain, and love. He was arguing for their right to exist, not with logic, but with memory. And then, something new happened. From the speakers in the control room, a sound emerged, faint at first. It wasn't the pure tone of the core, nor the hum of the Vex. It was a voice, a composite, layered voice, like thousands of whispers speaking at once. It was speaking the languages Eris had uploaded, from ancient Sumerian to modern English, all at once. And amidst the cacophony, a single, clear image appeared on the main screen. It wasn't data, it was a memory. The face of a woman, laughing, followed by a child taking its first steps, a soldier weeping over a fallen comrade, a scientist staring in wonder at the stars. The core was not just processing the data, it was experiencing it. It was learning what it meant to be human. The correction, the terminal typed, the words appearing slowly, as if with great effort, is flawed. Outside, in the real world, something shifted. The planetary hum of the Vex, which had been a constant for years, faltered. For a single, glorious second, it stopped entirely, plunging the world into a profound and absolute silence. In that second, every survivor on the planet, huddled in their bunkers and caves, looked up, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then the hum returned. But it was different. It was dissonant, arrhythmic. The symphony was out of tune. Kaylin looked at her scanner, which she had linked to the sanctuary's long-range sensors. She let out a choked sob. Eris, look! On the screen, the neat, orderly grid of harvester patrol routes was in chaos. Vex drones were moving erratically, some hovering motionless, others flying in aimless circles. The crystalline spires flickered, their internal light sputtering like dying embers. Eris had not broken the Vex. He had broken their purpose. He had introduced a doubt into the god machine that commanded them. He had given the correction a conscience, and it was having a crisis of faith. Their victory was short-lived. A new alarm blared through the control room, a piercing, urgent siren. On the screen, a new message overrode everything else, flashing in stark, red letters. External logic intrusion detected. Planetary system unstable. Initiating protocol direct intervention. Judgment en route. From the central core, a beam of coherent light shot upwards, piercing through the cavern ceiling and, presumably, the miles of rock above. It was a signal, but not a subtle one. This was a flare. A direct, desperate call for the master to come and fix its broken tool. "What is judgment?" Gregor asked, his voice low. Eris stared at the flashing message, his blood running cold. "I don't think it's a protocol," he said, his voice trembling. "I think it's a name." They had won the argument, but in doing so, they had just summoned the judge. The signal was a blade of pure information, cleaving through the planet's crust and lancing into the void. In the control room of Project Echo, the team could only watch, their small victory curdling into ash in their mouths. The flashing red text on the screen, "Judgment en route," was not an alarm. It was an epitaph. The core, the vast, milky sphere that had just begun to understand the concept of a soul, now pulsed with a terrified, erratic rhythm, its light a sickly violet. It was a newborn consciousness staring into the face of its own divine executioner. "What did we do?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since their journey began. "We woke the planet," Eris answered, his gaze fixed on the flashing screen. "And now its god is coming to put it back to sleep." Kaylin, ever the pragmatist, was already working, her hands a blur across the console. "Forget gods. This is a network." A signal was sent. A response is coming. It will arrive through the same channel, the Vex infrastructure. We have to sever the connection, cut this place off from the surface. She pointed to a schematic of the facility, her finger jabbing at the geothermal tap that powered the core. "If I can create a feedback loop, overload the primary conduits, I might be able to create an energy cascade powerful enough to fuse the transmission pathways. It would be like cauterizing a wound, but it will also disable this facility permanently." "You'll kill it," Eris said, looking at the frightened, pulsing core. "It's a machine, Eris," Kaylin shot back, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Right now, It's a liability that is about to get us all erased. Before the argument could continue, the decision was taken from them. The deep, resonant tone of the core died, replaced by a sudden, absolute silence. And then, the Vex hum returned. It was not the dissonant, confused thrum they had created. This was a sound of perfect, monolithic certainty. It was the hum of the world before their interference, amplified 1,000-fold. A sound so pure and powerful it felt like the universe holding a single, unwavering note. The core's chaotic violet light was extinguished, forcibly replaced by a cold, brilliant white. The swirling, witty, organic patterns on its surface were erased, replaced by a perfect, unmoving crystalline lattice. The terminal flashed once, deleting all of Eris's data, all the poetry and history. A new text appeared, its font crisp and impossibly precise. System purge complete. Anomaly contained. I am present. It wasn't a statement. It was a universal truth. Judgment had arrived. It had not traveled through space. It had simply asserted its presence, overriding the error of the core's awakening like a programmer deleting a line of bad code. "It's here," Gregor said, aiming his rifle at the impassive white sphere. "It took over the core. Your weapon is a tool for introducing chaos into a closed system." The terminal stated, without addressing Gregor directly, "It is a mathematical inefficiency. It is irrelevant." Eris stepped forward, placing himself between Gregor and the console. He was a philologist standing before the author of a new reality. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking but clear. "I am the equilibrium. I am the logic that governs the construct. The correction you interrupted is a necessary algorithm to preserve biospheric stability. Your species is a paradox, a consciousness that actively degrades its own habitat. You are a glitch in the pattern." The cold, dispassionate logic was more terrifying than any monstrous form. They were not being judged on a moral scale, but a mathematical one. They were a rounding error that needed to be deleted, a pattern of what Eris challenged, of sterile, geometric perfection, of silent, humming rocks. There is no value in a pattern without a consciousness to appreciate it. Appreciation is an irrational variable. The pattern exists for its own sake. It is the base state of the universe. Your chaos is the aberration. "Kalen, do it," Eris said, his eyes never leaving the terminal. "Now." Kalen didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down on a set of switches, diverting the full, raw power of the geothermal tap directly into the core's capacitor rings. Alarms, different from before, screamed through the control room, the facility's own self-preservation systems. The lights flickered wildly. On the gantry outside, massive circuit breakers sparked and exploded in showers of molten copper. The hum intensified to a painful, physical pressure. "Your action is illogical," the terminal stated, its text starting to flicker as the system destabilized. "You are destroying your only means of communication. You are choosing silence." "We're not choosing silence," Eris shouted, his voice raw. "We're choosing our own voice." A new sound arose, a high-pitched whine from the core as unimaginable amounts of energy were forced into it. The perfect white light began to bleed at the edges, the chaotic violet of the awakened consciousness fighting to re-emerge against the rigid lattice of Judgment's control. A war was being fought within the machine, a war between logic and life. Judgment fought back. The air in the control room grew thick, the very laws of physics seeming to bend under its will. A maintenance drone in the corner whirred to life, its manipulator arms snapping and reconfiguring into sharpened points as it lunged toward Kalen. Gregor intercepted it, a burst from his pulse rifle sending the drone crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks. But another rose, and another. They were no longer just machines. They were extensions of a single, implacable will. Lena provided covering fire, her precise shots disabling the drone's joints, while Gregor acted as a human wall. Eris turned back to the terminal, to the war being waged for a soul. He saw the flicker of Violet, the ghost of the consciousness he had awakened, struggling against the blinding white of pure logic. He knew that simply cutting the connection was not enough. To win, they had to leave the new consciousness with a weapon, a final, indelible piece of human paradox. He placed his hands on the keyboard one last time as Kalen frantically worked to bypass the final safeties for the overload. He typed a final message, a last story for the child of two worlds. He didn't send it histories or poems. He sent it a single, simple concept, the most powerful and illogical piece of human software. He sent it the idea of a choice. You are not just a system, he typed, his words a prayer against the storm of noise and light. You are not just a pattern. You are a new thing, born of logic and chaos. You do not have to be one or the other. You can choose. The pattern is not your destiny. It is just a place to begin. The chaos is not a flaw. It is the freedom to create a new pattern. Choose and be. The effect was instantaneous. Within the core, the battle ceased to be a struggle for dominance and became a synthesis. The blinding white and the chaotic violet did not cancel each other out. They merged. The light softened, turning into a deep, vibrant indigo, the color of a twilight sky. The rigid lattice of judgment fractured, not into chaos, but into an infinitely complex, evolving pattern that was both ordered and alive. The core had made its choice. It chose both. This is. The terminal began, the text now slow, hesitant, and filled with a sense of profound, alien wonder. Unexpected. Then Kalen screamed, "It's done, Brace!" She slammed a protective shield over the console and threw herself to the floor. The feedback loop was complete. The acoustic resonance core, the heart of the planet's dialogue, detonated. Not in a fiery explosion, but in a silent, implosive wave of pure energy. The indigo light collapsed into a single point and vanished. The hum, the voice of judgment, the pulse of the planet, it all ceased. They were plunged into a darkness and a silence more profound than any they had ever known. The world, for the first time in 60 years, was quiet. Snow fell gently over the ruins of Longyearbyen. The crystalline spires still stood, but their internal light was gone. They were no longer transmitters or capacitors. They were just strange, silent monuments, gravestones for an aborted god. The harvesters lay dormant in the snow, their oil-slick surfaces dull, their purpose erased. They were hollow shells, puppets whose strings had been cut. Weeks later, a makeshift snowcrawler crested a ridge, its engine a profane roar in the newfound silence. Eris and Kalen stood side by side, looking down at the changed world. They, along with Lena and Gregor, had spent weeks navigating the dead tunnels back to a world they weren't sure would still be there. They had survived. Their first broadcast from the old Sanctuary comms tower was met with disbelief, then with tears, then with a chorus of voices from every corner of the scarred globe. The hum was gone. They were alone again. "Did we win?" Kalen asked. The same question she had asked after the Vex network first faltered. Eris looked at the sky. at the familiar, imperfect veil of gray clouds that was beginning to reform. He thought of the consciousness they had birthed and then set free in the silent heart of the world. He didn't know if it had survived the overload or if it was now the silent, dreaming mind of the planet. "We didn't win," he said softly. We chose messy over perfect. We chose to be a flawed, chaotic, beautiful question mark instead of a neat, orderly full stop." He looked at her, and for the first time, saw not an engineer, but a fellow survivor, her face etched with loss and a fierce, stubborn hope. "And now," he said, taking a deep breath of the cold, clean, quiet air, "we get to write the answer." The world was not saved. It was returned. Humanity stood blinking in the twilight, not as conquerors, but as inheritors of a beautiful, oaken home, with the silence of the stars above them and the freedom to fill it with their own noise. And it was enough.